Instructions.
Thank you, David. Welcome to Sephardic World. We welcome our viewers on YouTube, but we also welcome our patrons who make all of this possible. Today, we'll have a talk by Yochai Ben-Ghedalia about the Central Archives for the History of the Jewish People. They were established in Jerusalem in 1939. And they have archives from hundreds of Jewish communities, and they also have archives of local, national, international Jewish organizations, and they have private collections of many outstanding Jewish personalities. These archives now have the biggest collection of documents, pinkassim, and other records of Jewish history. This meeting will focus on the collection's Sephardic records. Dr. Yochai Ben-Ghedalia serves as the director of the Central Archives in Jerusalem since 2012. He has a book coming out in Hebrew about European Jewish Philanthropy and Jerusalem during the Crimean War. It's not coming out, it already has been published by the Ben-Zvi Institute. Thank you for speaking to us, Yochai, and you can have the word now.
Okay, good evening, everyone. It's a pleasure being here. I heard a lot about this forum from my friend Kevin Martin of blessed memory, and I'm very happy to be here. And I want to dedicate my talk to his blessed memory. The Central Archives for the History of the Jewish People, as Ton said, serves as the National Archive of the Jewish People, which is a quiet, strange phenomenon. Usually, national archives are state archives, not an archive of a nation, of a people, of a ethnic group. And still, that's something that they decided to establish about 85 years ago. And back then they decided to establish our archives on the basic units of Jewish existence. It's the Jewish community, of course. That's the basic unit. There are other organizations, other affiliations, mostly international, which is a phenomenon that we meet from the mid-19th century and on. So we have many archives of international Jewish organizations. We have private collections of prominent Jews or family collections also. And we also do a lot of work in archives abroad, looking for documentation on Jews in those archives. And so that's the additional level of work. And we also make acquire copies of selected documents and add them to our collections. In my talk, I will try to demonstrate sources for genealogical research on Sephardic Jews in our archives, based on those based on this structure that I mentioned before. So we will start with the community, and of course with the most basic kind of material of documentation, which is the BMD, the birth, marriage, death registers. So as I said, we have various collections, and this is, for example, from the Sephardic community in Bucharest, a birth register. It's important to say that in early times, people were not registered. I mean, it was not very important to take notice that someone was born or someone died. It's not so important. Maybe it's important for the family, that someone passed away, so they will be able to say Kaddish or something in his memory. But it was not important for the general public. It was not always also important to know when someone was born. Um, for the halacha, for the Jewish law, there are over criterion of to know when someone becomes mature and adult, and you don't need to know when someone was born. It was only later on when the state wanted to know better to regulate and to know when someone was born. So we see from the mid 18th century in some places a bit earlier, some places a bit later, we see those birth registers. And you can see also that sometimes they had to use the forms and books, ledgers that were not only for Jews. So you can, for example, see here in the birth register of the Portuguese community from Hamburg and Altona that it was originally Tauf. I mean, it was used for baptizing the kids. So they changed it into birth. And of course, all those columns to the right that deals with the name of the priest and the date of when the kid was baptized, of course, were not used. In other registers, you may find that they used it in order to document the day of the milah, of the circumcision of the kid. Sometimes you will find it in our archives, not in a Sephardic community like we saw before, in the Portuguese community, for example, in Hamburg or elsewhere, but you may find Sephardic Jews who were part of a general community. So here, for example, in the birth register of Siena in Italy, which was not a Sephardic community, it was a general Italian community with Ashkenazi, with Italian, with Sephardic Jews, you will find this guy in the middle. It caught my eye because the name in Hebrew, Arpachshad Yaakov, Arpachshad is one of the names which is mentioned in Genesis, one of the names of the sons of the descendants, I think, of the Semite, I think, which is a very rare and strange name today. But this guy in Italian, his name was Archimedes. So Arpachshad is for Archimedes, and Yaakov is Giacomo, of course. But his family name is Ben-Porad, which is, of course, Ben-Porat, which is a Sephardi name. So sometimes there's a need to also to look for Sephardi names in order to identify the Sephardic families inside general community. Of course, a very basic, we will have also some libros de Ktubot, I mean, when that document the marriage, but there are also other ways of documenting the marriages. So this is, for example, the dowry register from Algeria, from Constantine. We have, I don't know, more than 30, I think, pinkassim ledgers of this kind from this specific community document the name of the bride and the bridegroom, the names of their fathers, whether they are still alive or not. And of course, the most important is not the genealogy, but how much money or which artifacts, which items the bride brought with her to the new family. We have the same registers also in Izmir, in Smyrna. I did not bring here death registries. We have some, and I planned, to be honest, to to add it to the PowerPoint today, but we were shut and we worked from home, so I was not able to take photos. So I apologize for that. But I brought another kind of document, which is pinkassim, ledgers of burial societies. Usually, the ledgers of the burial societies do not document the deaths, the people who were buried, but they document the activity of the society itself. So this, for example, also from the same community, the community of Bucharest, and in addition to all the regulations of the society, as you can see here, at the end, you will find all those people who were part and signed that they are part of this society. So you can learn not about who was buried by the society, but who was a member of this NGO of this society. And you will see it, for example, also here in Izmir. When we are working on on community materials, we will also find more modern materials that document other activity. This is, for example, from a Purim feast in Temuco in Chile of one of the organizations, Sephardi organizations, the Zionist Sephardic society, B'nai Kedem, in the Jewish community in Temuco, Chile. Many of the Jews in Temuco were immigrated from Monastir, from nowadays North Macedonia, and we will see the same community later on. And here again, you can see a kind of tagging of who's in the photo. That's really also important and can be used. In addition to a traditional way of documenting, sometimes there is a need to make other ways of documentation. In the case of Saloniki, which is of course a very important Sephardic community, there was a big fire in 1917 that as part of following this fire, of course, there were many people who were killed. There were big losses also to property. But from our perspective, the community archives was burnt entirely, and many people were also who were saved somehow remained without their very basic personal documentation. So the community initiated those declaraciones. They came to the community office and make a declaration that I was born in this day, this is my name, I live here and there, and of course, giving photos. It is a fantastic source, and also very nice. We have some of those ledgers, but the problem with those ledgers are that they are not organized alphabetically or like we usually have. They are not organized in a chronological order, but they are organized according to the accidental way that someone just came and make that declaration at a certain point in early 1920s. And so for those kinds of materials, it's very important to have groups like you that take those ledgers and index them. So now there's another genealogy group which is working on that and making indexes for that, and those materials will become available and easy for readers. It's especially, I think, important here because they are not in order. They are in Ladino. The forms, at least for me, I can read them easily, but the handwritten, of course, is in Solitreo, which is not very easy for many people to read. And so there's those gaps should be bridged through indexing. And of course, it's needless to say that community like Saloniki, that many of the people who were documented here in 1921, here, for example, many of them were killed in the Holocaust a few years later on. Another way of, another kind of documentation which is not regular, we have in our archive of Monastir of Bitula in North Macedonia. We have in our archive the Eventov collection, which was founded by the Federation of Former Yugoslavian Jews in Israel. And they had a very nice historical committee, and they collected lots of materials. So as part of the work, they also collected copies of an important collection, which is now mostly housed in the state archives of Bitula, and has all the photos and some details about the members of the Jewish community. Those photos were taken by a very important photographer, Menaki, from the Menaki brothers, which is one of the most known photographers in the Balkan, because the Bulgarians who were occupying Macedonia during World War II made the Jews take photos and told them, you need to take photos, and all of them took photos, and we have thousands of them, but there are much more in Bitula. Most of the, following the information that was collected as part of this initiative, the Bulgarian gathered all the Jews of Bitula, sent them to Skopje one day in a train, and all of them were sent from there to Treblinka. Only really few were saved somehow. Some of them left to the partisans before, and some of them were part of a medical team, so they were somehow needed and left behind. So we talked till now, just a minute. So in addition to, usually in a community archive, you will find, or you expect to find documentation on the same community. But in many cases, inside one community archive, you may find very important genealogical materials about members of other communities. This is, for example, the case of the Lemel School in Jerusalem. The school was established in 1856 by a Jewish philanthropist from Vienna. And since it was established by a Viennese philanthropist, the school had to report to the Jewish community. And so they sent annual reports mentioning the names of the students, their age, their family name, the name of the father, etc., and also mentioning their achievements in school. And for some reasons that I won't get into them here, the whole members of all the students in this school in the first decades were Sephardic. So you can learn a lot about Sephardic families in Jerusalem through the archive of the Jewish community in Vienna. And another example, you can also, for example, learn about the Jews of other places through that archive. Um, there's just trying, for example, there's a huge report which was sent by the Jews of Bursa in Turkey today, following an earthquake uh, in the city. The whole city uh, demolished, and they asked for help from other Jewish communities, and they received big help from Vienna. And following that, they sent them a very big report indicating the names of the members of the community, which is really a fantastic source to learn about a community that we don't have too much documentation about it. Okay, so now we'll move to another way, another um, mode, let's say, of documentation by us, which is not the Jewish community, but the International Jewish Organization. We have lots of those international organizations. We have the archives of the Alliance Israelite Universelle. We have copies of most of the materials, which is in Paris in the headquarters. But we also have the archives of local branches in Morocco, in Iran, in Tunisia, in Jerusalem, and in Haifa. And especially in Morocco, you will find thousands of registers of classes. Um, and in that, you will find the name and the family name, the date of birth. Sometimes you will find an exact date, the name of the father, name of the mother, the profession of the father, when they enter school, when they left school, and why. Um, it is a fantastic source. Many of those registers were indexed by Matilda Tadger of Less Memory, and there is also an initiative, a current initiative by IGRA to index some of them at least. It is really a fantastic source, especially since many of those people don't have an official date of birth. For example, a good friend of mine came to our archives to prepare the 1880th birthday of her father. And while working on those indexes, on those ledgers, she found that it actually was not 80 but 81 that birthday. And that's something which is quite common. We have also other archives of international Jewish organizations. From the Sephardic perspective, I think very interesting are archives that deals with Jewish immigration. We have some that relates to immigration to Argentina. Most of them have to do with Ashkenazic Jews, but still there are lots of Sephardic Jews that use that. There's also the activity of the Ort and Oze and Jewish Colonization Association in North Africa, for example, and in the Balkan, especially after World War II. So it also includes fantastic materials about students, about children that were assisted, or artisans that were assisted by those organizations. And now, as I said before, a third way of documenting is the personal archive. There are various personal archives. Here I choose to focus on the archive of the Shaltiel, of David Shaltiel, from the Shaltiel family. It is a small archive, but it's really interesting to see how people search for their past, for their family history, especially in the era before the internet. So that's a letter that Shaltiel was at that time an ambassador in Netherlands. He was um, he was born in Hamburg. We will see that in a minute. Immigrated to Israel in the 20s, became a prominent figure in the Haganah, and one of the first generals in the Israeli army in 1948. So that's a letter he wrote to Chacham Gaon in London, uh, asking him to help him to identify sources about the family, because as we know about the Western Sephardic diaspora, they were all connected. So he told him, as part of my work while being in Amsterdam, I went to all those archives looking for Shealtiels there. Please help me also to check that in the Spanish Portuguese synagogue archives in London, whether you may find there some Shaltiels, and he mentioned the names. But we also see how he worked. So, for example, there's the family Sidurim, the family prayer books, that at the end, the father wrote the names, or the mother wrote the names of the kids that were born. So here, that's documentation of David and his siblings. So there's Juliana Paulina, there's Raphael, there's David, there's Joseph, and there's Judith, and when they were born, which, by the way, not only the date, but also the exact hour that they were born. And also they mentioned the name in German. And also he collected other materials, so that, for example, the wedding of his grandfather, that he was named after him, David Shaltiel. So that's from their wedding, um, uh, kind of a souvenir that was printed. He also had other family um, documents, for example, and that's quite funny. That's a document that exempt his grandfather, who had the same name, David, from military service in Germany. And he also wrote a note that his father was not adequate to service, and he, of course, was one of the first generals. So it's not it did not remain in the family, let's say. And of course, there are more basic documentation that he found. This, for example, again, that's the same grandfather, David, who was born in the 1840s, also in as part of Hamburg. And of course, other kind of materials. This is from the Red Cross, telegram that was sent from Yosef that we saw before, one of his siblings of David, of the second David. We see that they added to his name Yosef Israel Shaltiel. I mean, the Nazis had him to add this name. And that's a telegram that he sent in July 1942. Living in today's, feeling well, high spirits, get growing beautifully. We will write when it be possible. No news from Paulina, that's the older sister we saw before. Kids should keep hoping, warm wishes. And we know that some of his siblings perished in the Holocaust. And based on that, he, of course, made this family tree. It's not a very good photo, but I took it somehow. It's a huge document that he made. So till now we spoke about the original materials that one can find by us, divided into community materials, organizations, international organizations, and private materials. But we also do a lot of work in archives abroad. Most of our work is in recent archives. I mean, talking recent, I mean 19th century, 20th century. But we also uh, conducted lots of surveys and register in archives, for example, in pre-expulsion Spain. So this is, for example, a register that we initiated in the Archivio Capitular de Barcelona. If you are familiar with the big cathedral in Barcelona, so inside there, there's a fantastic archive, really fantastic. Um, it was built in the 15th century, but it goes much earlier. The materials goes much earlier to the even to the first millennium, and you can see the documentation about Jews from the first millennium. Uh, the documentation, you will find it either in the church papers. You can go to the city archive and see from the perspective of the citizens of the city, and you can go, of course, to the crown. For example, here in Barcelona, it will be the Crown of Aragon, and go to their archives and see there also the documentation. Lots of the documentation will be in notary books, and we initiated the work there that people actually went page by page, look for Judio or Jueo in Catalan or whatever, looking for documentation about Jews and making a short summary of it. And this, for example, from another example, this is from the National Archive in Madrid. And those are, since that's something that we created in the past, and we're still working on creating in other places, those are available online, can be seen from our website. So in that case, usually we won't digitize or not microfilm the documents themselves, because in this case they are scattered in a very big corpus of materials, and we are looking for a documentation here and documentation there. Will small uh, do, mention here, mention there. Usually we won't digitize that, but in some cases you can find real documentation of Jews which is dedicated only for Jews. Could be special notary books, which are libros de Jueos, I mean books about the Jews, which are notary books, and they're really fantastic documentation. And for example, you can find a list like this, an inventory of the belongings of the Jewish community when it was liquidated during the expulsion. So this is really a very touching document, documenting the expulsion. By the way, this specific document we did not digitize yet. We are working on accessing it, but that part of the work that we are still doing in various archives, looking for documentation. And of course, it could be materials that are held in Jewish archives, and we have received lots of materials that are kept, for example, in the Spanish Portuguese synagogue, which are now at the London Metropolitan Archives. So we have digital copies of and microfilms of various documentation and of various documents, and they can be accessible through our website. As it's always strange to speak in a PowerPoint presentation. We will be more than happy to see you in our new building in the National Library of Israel. In the right, you can see the general reading rooms, which are really fantastic. And in the left and to the left, that's the special collections reading room. There's enough space for many people to come. So we are very happy people will come and use our materials. Um, of course, people can always email us, access our website and learn more, and learn from time to time more about what we do for Facebook or the website of the National Library of Israel. So thank you for your attention, and I will be more than happy to answer questions.
Thank you very much. Do you want to close your PowerPoint so we can sort of, great, brilliant. As you said, it's quite an unusual collection in that you have elements from different parts of the Jewish world. Do you have any kind of strategy to sort of join everything up? So, for example, you have some material from Morocco. There might be material from Morocco in France and indeed in Morocco. And in the current world, and indeed, I think there is also in Belgium, um, it's possible using sort of not just digitization, but also sort of geographical information systems and other technologies to virtually create joined up archives. Is there any strategy at the moment to achieve that?
So I'm not sure I brought materials from Morocco, but of course we have lots of documentation from Morocco.
As an example, as
Yeah,
an example.
but yeah, we have a strategy, but the there's also a need to translate the strategy into work, and that sometimes there's a need to use opportunities. I mean, strategy is nice, but you also need someone at the other side that will cooperate with you. Sometimes it's easier, sometimes it's less easy for various reasons. Um, and for example, nowadays we are working with various archives in the world. We have few initiatives in Latin America, a few initiatives we have huge project in Ukraine nowadays, Janet, and we are doing a lot of work today. And we're trying to shift our work based on both the opportunities and also the needs. And the
Yeah.
needs also always also change from time to time. I mean, the urge to do something is it change from time to time.
Yes, you mentioned our friend Kevin Martin, who's no longer with us, of course. We have his archive. His family gave it to us, although it's not yet as well organized as it could be. Do you, with all the different languages and alphabets and so forth, do you have any transcription projects? So, for example, well, with David Silver, led by David Silvero, who's in this conversation, we have a project using the Transcribus platform from the University of Innsbruck. Do you have anything similar?
So basically, our work is more to gather the materials, the raw materials,
Yes.
and we leave it for initiatives like you to work on the on the transcription, the indexing. We are involved in various projects, but they are less, I mean, they are less our main core activity. We are cooperating with various activities, but it's not our core work. Our core work is to identify materials, to digitize them, to catalog them, to catalog the materials that we have as originals and we have in our backlog, and of course to make them available and accessible for researchers that will do the work. Uh,
And you, presumably
David?
have, sorry.
Sorry, David. I just wanted to comment. Yochai, thank you so much for that presentation. Over the years, when I used to do a lot of volunteer work for Jewish Gen for Ukraine SIG, I worked very closely with Yochai and his team all over Ukraine, getting the materials digitized and accessible. And then we would just have a team of volunteers who would go through and deal with the translations and the indexing. But working with Yochai and his team, wherever you have the opportunity to work with, is always an amazing treat. Thank you, Yochai.
That's great. And you must have a budget as well. I mean, do you take requests from people who are keen to see particular archives being digitized?
So we have service for digitization. It's different, of course, from, I mean, if someone needs, one file or there's a huge project, of course, it's different. So we have those services. Most of the digitization which is being done by us are part of much bigger projects funded by various initiatives. And we are doing a lot of digitization. I mean, this year we are planning to do more than 1.5 million frames, which is not a lot. I mean, if you compare it to the amount of materials that we have, and that's in addition to the work that we are doing abroad. I mean, not digitization of our materials, and again, it's where we work that and which, as you said, it also has to do with funding. Of course, it always gets there, but it's not only that. I mean, we have our priority list, we have our own fundings for projects, our own sources, and we're trying to prioritize. I must say that almost all of our North African materials are digitized already. I mean, some of them are accessible for our website, some of them, due to various legal issues, are accessible only in our premises. We are trying to make more and more accessible, and soon we'll be able to change the policy and make more. We are working on that with our legal experts. And we hope that much more will be available online.
Thank you. And do you,
are you planning to put everything online that you digitize?
So we cannot put everything online because, I mean, materials that we have digitized elsewhere, we need to get the permission of the original archive, of the archive that holds the original, whether we can put it online or not. Also, with materials that we have, even if there are no restraints from, I don't know, the owner, there may be some problems of copyrights or privacy, but that's much more with the modern materials, of course, not with the old ones.
Do you have relationships with other groups? I think Beta Tetzufot is now Anu, I think, and also, for example, My Heritage. Do you have any involvement with them?
So, as Jeanette mentioned before, we had a strategic cooperation with a special interest group, Ukraine and Jewish Gen. We had other cooperations in the past with other organizations. We had a very big project with My Heritage 2 years ago regarding immigration forms of people trying to flee Vienna in 1930s after the Anschluss. They are accessible for their website. They are also accessible from our website. It was a very big project, and yeah, and we are very happy to cooperate. And of course, once the materials are online, and we're trying much more and more that the materials will be online, So, I mean, the cooperation can be passive. I mean, we are there and the materials are there and people are invited to use them and groups are invited to use them and to digitize. We have now cooperation with IGRA with some projects, and that's also nice. Yes.
Is there any relationship with the Egyptian National Archives?
No, not for sure not today, but
Yeah.
for that I recall, not only in the past. As Yaakov can say, it's much more. It's quite complicated.
Yes.
Um,
Yeah, no, there's a lot of material there that interests us that we can't get our hands on, but
I mean, we have, for example, part of the archive. We have the archive of Israel Ben-Zev, who was active he made a lot of research with the late Geniza, let's say, in Egypt regarding the late community,
yes.
the Mustarab community. So this collection, which is made mostly of copies or even transcriptions, are very important source for researchers working on that community. Yeah, and we have materials about Jews in Egypt, mostly marriage contracts, which are interesting.
Thank you. Ton, do you have any questions, or do we have any in the chat, or indeed on YouTube? Let's see.
Boos Kahan has a question about whether you are aware of students or students of history of university personnel who have used your materials. I can imagine that that people send you their PhDs or their academic articles if they are based upon sources that you have.
So we have, of course, basically our users can be divided into academic world and the family historians. That's the two groups. As far as I see from the chat, I mean, the question was more directed about big data and questions like that, more. So first of all, we are doing some of the work. I mean, trying to make, to enrich our descriptions from our metadata through AI. We're working on that. And we are very happy that people will do it. I mean, we have, for example, I mentioned before the project we had with MyHeritage. It includes more than 60,000 forms. So that mentions where people were born, which street and exact address, when they were born, when they came to Vienna, etc., etc., and of course their profession. So there's so much data that can be, I mean, there's so much work that can be done with big data regarding that. We are trying more and more in recent years to do more analytic cataloging that will enable people to do it. For example, we, as part of our cooperation with Holocaust Museum, in Washington, they're digitizing by us for many years. And we are just recently, we decided that they will digitize an Italian collection that has to do with that's an archive of an organization that dealt with Jewish refugees in World War II in Italy, Della Sem. And we decided not only to digitize it, but also to divide it into personal files and to include all that data. And of course, there's so much work that can be done based on that. But as as I said before, once you make your material, I mean, in the past it was much easier for me to answer those kinds of questions. Today, once we put it online, it's there. I mean, we are very happy that people will do it, will take, I don't know, API and make the big data. So that's for them, and we are very happy about that. Sometimes there's a need that we will actually be involved. Especially with big data, sometimes people want to get access to the materials behind the screen. And in those cases, we are very happy to open our doors for those initiatives.
There's an interesting question by Jana Gold. Have you been able to access any records from the former Turkish Ottoman Empire?
Okay, so as I mentioned in my presentation, the archives of the Jewish community of Izmir. It's a very big archive, includes, for example, many censuses also of the community, which is really important. It's not very easy because most of the Jews has, 3 or 4 family names, so it's not very easy to work with that. But that's a fantastic collection. We have the archives of the Jewish community of Edirne. We have microfilms of the Istanbul community. So there is plenty of materials from Turkey, let's say, as I mentioned before, Saloniki, but most of the Saloniki archive we have is from the Greek period, not from the Ottoman period. We have less materials from the Levant. We have from Jerusalem, from Safed. We have scattered materials from here and there, but from Turkey we have some very important collections, yes, and many people are using it. Again, for genealogical research, there's a need to be an expert. It's not easy. There's a need to read Solitario, and as you know better than me, in the Ottoman Empire, it is much more tricky to work on genealogy. I mean, many people share the same name. It's not easy at all. It's quite different, and it's really interesting from other places. And that's and there are, of course, experts which are using it.
Do you have a working relationship with the Turkish archives concerning their holdings?
No, we don't have, at least today. We had at the time very good relations with the community back then, but with the official archives we do not have. And it also has to do with the question that David asked before. I mean, where we work, sometimes we can plan and initiate work somewhere, and then the political situation change. It could be the political situation between Israel and those countries, sometimes between, I mean, the political situation inside one country can be changed also. There were some initiatives that we started and we were not able to proceed, but we're trying all the time to do what we can do.
Yeah, I think especially the Ottoman state archives would be very interesting, and of course also Sharia court records from around the Middle East. But I think maybe after the next Turkish election it will be easier, but who knows? But David Silvera just suggests it would be a good idea if National Library of Israel linked to the Nação Hebraica project. There's the link there. We can of course send it to you, because obviously it's making these records sort of accessible to everybody, which is.
And also, I didn't mention, of course, like every institution, we get reference questions from various users, and in many cases, we don't have the data, but we are very happy to direct them to other institutions, other initiatives that have the data or the knowledge, the expertise, and we're very happy to do that.
Great, thank you. Bernard, you have your hand up.
Yeah, first of all, I'd like to thank you for a very interesting presentation covering a lot of ground. I have a couple of very specific questions. You just talked about the Saloniki records and the need to be able to read Solitreo. What language is the Solitreo transcribing? Is it Turkish, Greek? Is it Ladino, medieval Spanish, or what? Because that obviously affects being able to understand it.
So in this specific record, it is Ladino.
It's Ladino.
It is Ladino. I can tell from my own experience as as a master, as an MA student, I came to a project. I learned. I started working with Solitreo materials, and and one document was so easy, and then not easy, but I challenged it somehow, and then I came to another document that it was supposed to be, more advanced after what I did before, and I wasn't able to go anywhere. And it took me, a day to understand that it actually was not Hebrew, it was Ladino. So, yeah.
That was partly why I asked, because I have had a similar experience in something else that I'm going to ask another question on, which is I struggled with 200 pages of a book, thinking my Spanish is appalling, before I understood that it was actually Catalan that I had been struggling with. And that leads me on to the next question. Long before I got into the whole genealogy and Jewish history research, I did quite a lot of research in the Barcelona archives. So I was fascinated to see the records that you showed. The documents that you showed from there were typewritten. So I presume that they had been transcribed, presumably in Barcelona, by the archives. And I just wondered if you could give us a little summary of what kind of material is in those, because I'm hoping at some point in the next year or so to be back in Barcelona, possibly doing research on something nothing to do with this. But I would be fascinated to take a look while there and see what there is to discover.
So the documents, the typewritten materials are regesta of materials or summaries, let's say, of materials that we initiated. We paid for researchers in Barcelona, in Girona, and elsewhere to work for us and to go through, for example, notary books and look for documentation on Jews, which may be mentioned in this paragraph or in that paragraph, in this case, in this notary case, or in that case, and to make a short summary of it. So those specific regesta are available by us. They were commissioned by us. They are available by us. As far that I know, most of the copies are not in the original archive. We put them online and they're available to everyone. There is no reason to come to Jerusalem to see the regesta and then to go to Barcelona and work in the archive. So it's there. There are, by the way, additional, there are also, I think, other initiatives like this, but most of them were done by researchers and not by, so they usually are not published, more used as raw materials for research. In some cases, in recent years, some of the archives has done in Barcelona, for example, had made those regesta and more generally regarding the parchment collections or the notary books collections, usually not specifically about Jews, but more generally, of course. And we have our own very specific and parochial perspective, which because we are interested in this segment of the population. So that can be found by us.
Thank you.
Great. Thank you very much. If we don't have any more questions. And first of all, we're really grateful that you spoke, and now we have made contact, and thank you to Jacob Marachi for doing that. We hope that we can develop a relationship going forwards. And Ton, would you like to close the meeting?
Yes. Thank you. This was Sephardic World, brought to you by the Sephardic Genealogical Society. As always, we thank our patrons. They make all of this possible. We thank our viewers on YouTube. And above all, we thank Yochai for giving a brilliant talk about the holdings of the CAHJP. And we hope that we will keep in touch. Our next speaker will be in 2 weeks, George Sacerdoce, maintaining your identity, your Sephardic identity. Thank you all for watching, and see you next time.